I'm Jessica, an Air Force captain who learned that sometimes the battlefield isn't overseas, it's your own living room. I came home to reconnect for Christmas, but instead uncovered a betrayal that reopened a wound my mother carved into me at 16. Now, I'm about to show them that the girl they sent away didn't just grow up, she grew stronger. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever had to choose peace over family. You never forget the moment your heart breaks for the first time. For me, it was at Raleigh Station, standing beside a duffel bag that weighed less than the silence between my parents. I was 16, sobbing, clutching the hem of my jacket, begging my mother not to send me away. She didn't flinch. "This is best for all of us," she said coldly, while my father stared off into the trees like he couldn't bear to watch. And then the train took me just like that. They called it military school, I called it exile. I hadn't thought about that day in years, I thought I'd outgrown it. But then 15 years later, that memory came rushing back with the kind of force only a mother's one-letter text can deliver. K, that's all she wrote. Not can't wait, not drive safe. Just one single, emotionless K in response to my message saying I was coming home for Christmas. I sat frozen in my dorm at Fort Bragg, the laptop screen still glowing with her reply. Around me, the familiar hum of fluorescent lights filled the air, bouncing off steel lockers and regulation gray walls. My boots were still wet from morning drills. My heart, somehow wetter from that one pixelated slap. I closed the laptop too hard and leaned forward on my elbows. I hadn't been home in 4 years. Deployments, promotions, training, excuses maybe, but real too. And now that I was finally ready, why did it feel like I was intruding? You'd think after commanding squadrons and dodging war zones, I'd be immune to a text. But this wasn't just a message. This was my mother, reminding me where I stand in her hierarchy, beneath convenience. I stared at the plastic Christmas tree I'd shoved into the corner of my dorm. I'd even wrapped it in red lights this year. Tried to feel something soft. But instead, all I felt was 16 again. Small, unwanted, silenced. I told myself this visit would be healing. A fresh start. I'd imagine my niece tugging on my sleeve, my sister Megan setting a wine glass in my hand, and maybe, just maybe, my mother looking me in the eye. But now, I wasn't so sure. Still, I wasn't the same girl they sent away. I was a captain, a decorated officer. I had a spine forged in fire and frost. If they thought I was just flying home to play nice and smile through the tension, they were in for a surprise. I looked over at my travel bag, already half-packed. My uniform was folded sharp in one corner. The Gucci coat I bought on my last overseas leave, tucked carefully beside it. I had gifts stashed for Megan's kids, who I barely knew, and I'd planned to cook a Christmas dinner myself, using recipes I'd memorized from Mom's old, stained cookbook. Because somewhere in me, despite the scars, there was still a part that believed I could be part of this family again. Even if their text was just a K, tell me, what would you do if your family sent you away at 16, and 15 years later, they still acted like you were a stranger? Stick around, because what happens next will make you question just how far someone will go to be accepted, and how much strength it takes to walk away instead. I should have known better than to hope. But hope, it turns out, is stubborn. It rides along even when logic warns you to pack only your practical expectations. And so, I planned. Planned like someone who believed they could rewrite old memories with new gestures. The morning after that cold K, I threw myself into preparation. Fort Bragg's commissary was decked in holiday cheer, fake pine garlands draped over the aisles, candy canes in every checkout lane. It's the most wonderful time of the year, played from an overhead speaker that crackled with age, and soldiers passed by with carts full of turkey, boxed stuffing, and beer. I was one of them, blending in but not really. I'd made a list, not just of groceries, but of ways to be the daughter they might finally want back. Brioche bread for French toast, Mom's favorite when I was little. Organic gingerbread mix and icing for the kids to decorate. A ham I'd brine myself with rosemary and orange slices. And then there were the toys. A robot construction kit for Caleb, my nephew who loved taking things apart, and a sparkle doll vanity set for Emma, who I'd only met once when she was a toddler with blueberry jam on her cheeks. I bought wrapping paper with metallic deer, a roll of twine for ribbons, and tiny white tags that I wrote on in my neatest cursive. To Caleb from Aunt Jess. To Emma, with love. I stood in line, cart full, while a woman behind me talked loudly on her phone about flying home to Wisconsin. She laughed about how her mom still made green bean casserole even though nobody liked it, and I felt something twist deep inside me. I missed green bean casserole. I missed family jokes. I missed belonging. And the more I missed it, the more carefully I packed each bag in the trunk of my car, like I could carry my own warmth into that cold house in Charlotte. I even stopped at a boutique to buy a bottle of hand cream for Megan, my sister, who used to braid my hair before school. The tag said it was made with sea kelp and lavender. She used to love that scent, back when we loved each other. But as I folded sweaters into my weekender bag that night, something kept pressing against my chest. A quiet fear. Not of rejection exactly, but of invisibility. I hadn't seen them in so long. What if I was just background now? The successful sister they told people about when it sounded impressive, but never really wanted in the room. I tried to brush it off. Told myself I was imagining it, that the K text didn't mean anything. But as I printed my flight itinerary and tucked my uniform into a garment bag, that memory of the train station kept creeping back in. Me standing there at 16 with tears freezing on my cheeks. My mother eyes dry. My father silent. And the thing is, I didn't just cry because they were sending me away. I cried because they didn't even look sad about it. They said it was for discipline. That military school would shape me. But I knew, even then, that I was just the inconvenient one. The too loud, too curious, too honest daughter. And I'd been paying for that ever since. Still, I pressed the creases out of my travel pants and double-checked my gift list. Because this time, I was going to earn something different. I was going to show them who I'd become, that I wasn't broken or bitter, that I could bring light into that house, whether they welcomed it or not. Before bed, I texted Megan. Excited to see you guys soon. Got something fun for the kids. Hope they still like puzzles and sparkles red. She didn't reply. That night, I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling's flickering fluorescent bulb, listening to the rustle of winter wind outside. And for the first time since the deployment ended, I felt less like a soldier and more like that girl again. The one who never asked to be tough but had to be. Still, I whispered to the dark, maybe this year will be different. And somewhere deep down, a quieter voice replied, or maybe it'll finally show you the truth. Charlotte was colder than I remembered. Not in temperature, though the December air did bite, but in atmosphere. The kind that clings to your skin, despite a warm coat and good intentions. I arrived on December 20, pulling into my childhood driveway just past dusk. The house looked the same. White shutters, chipped mailbox, wreath on the front door. From a distance, it almost felt like home. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew it was. The door creaked as I pushed it open, juggling bags, gifts, and a tray of homemade cookies I'd foolishly thought would break the ice. "Hey!" I called out, smiling too wide. "It's me!" From the living room, Megan looked up, just barely. She didn't get off the couch, didn't offer a hug. Her phone stayed glued to her hand as her thumb continued scrolling. "Oh, hey," she mumbled, barely audible over the sound of a YouTube video the kids were watching. Mom appeared next. She gave a quick nod, more managerial than maternal. "You're early." I checked my watch. "It's 6. I thought you said 7. We stood in silence for a beat too long. I tried again. "Brought some cookies, chocolate hazelnut. Figured I'd get a head start on dinner stuff tomorrow. Got that honey ham you always loved." Mom just said, and wandered back into the kitchen. I bent down to hug Caleb and Emma, who barely glanced up from their tablets. No squeals, no Aunt Jess. Just a distracted smile and a return to screen time. So much for the magic of reunion. At dinner, we sat around the table like strangers on a delayed flight. Conversation was stilted, orbiting around inflation, work stress, and how expensive Christmas had become. "We're keeping things small this year," Megan said, stabbing her salad like it had personally offended her. "Budget-'s tight," Mom nodded. "And with everything going up, utilities, groceries, we just can't do what we used to." I watched them eye my coat. It was a soft beige Gucci wool blend I'd saved months for. I wore it not to show off, but because I'd wanted to feel like my best self walking through that door. To signal, maybe, that I had finally become someone they could be proud of. But instead, it seemed to sour the air. "You don't really need a coat like that on base, do you?" Megan asked, sipping her wine with a bite in her tone. "I bought it for my promotion ceremony in D.C., I said carefully. "Figured I'd get some use out of it." "No judgment," she said, even though the judgment was clear. I glanced at the stack of wrapped gifts I'd placed by the fireplace earlier. Suddenly, they looked loud and out of place. The final straw wasn't anything said, it was what wasn't. After dinner, Megan stood and said, "Okay, let's get you settled. We've got the kids in the spare rooms, so you'll be in the living room. Couch folds out." I blinked. "The guest room's full. Caleb gets night terrors in new places," she said flatly. "And Emma needs her own space." I stared at the lumpy pull-out couch I'd spent years jumping on as a kid. Now it was my bed, because every other room had been assigned. Like I was the extra piece no one planned for. I forced a smile. Of course, makes sense. But inside, something cracked. Later that night, I sat cross-legged on the couch, wrapping myself in a throw blanket that smelled faintly of old perfume and fabric softener. My breath fogged up the window as I stared outside at the quiet neighborhood. It hit me then this wasn't reunion, it was performance. They had let me in the house, but not into their hearts, not really. And I couldn't stop wondering. Was I still that 16-year-old girl begging to be kept while everyone else decided where I didn't belong? But no, not anymore. I tucked my emotions into neat corners and told myself I could handle this. I'd faced worse than being overlooked. Still, I whispered into the dark, "Please let this be worth it." There's a point when disappointment stops hurting and starts sharpening. That's where I was on the fourth night back in Charlotte. I'd been moving through the house like a polite guest, smiling, offering help, keeping my voice even while Megan scrolled and Mom drifted from room to room like a supervisor at a shift she didn't want. I'd made breakfast for the kids, cleaned the kitchen, even refolded towels in the linen closet out of old habit. And still, nothing shifted. They didn't see me. Or maybe they saw me and simply didn't care. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. The living room couch dug into my ribs, the springs creaking each time I turned over. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I got up, thinking a glass of water might help, padding barefoot across the hall. The kitchen light was on dim, like they'd set it low to keep from waking anyone. Then I heard it. My mother's voice, low but clear. "We'll catch her after dinner on Christmas," she said, her words slicing through the quiet. "When she's relaxed, in a good mood." My stomach tightened. I stopped just short of the kitchen door, pressing my back to the hallway wall. Megan's voice next, a whisper but sharp enough to cut. "Are you sure she'll sign? She's gotten different since the last time, more serious." "She'll sign," Mom replied. "She owes us that much after everything we've done." I felt my pulse thudding in my ears. "Sign what?" Megan exhaled. "We won't get approved otherwise. Her military credit will seal it. The bank's already told me." Military credit, mortgage paperwork, my breath caught. Mom's voice again. "We just have to make her feel like she's part of it, like it's for the family. She's sentimental. She'll fold." I pressed my palm to the cool drywall to steady myself. All at once, the gifts, the groceries, the careful planning, they felt like props in someone else's play. I wasn't the daughter coming home for Christmas. I was the signature they needed. I gripped the empty glass in my hand so tightly it creaked. My throat burned, not just with anger but with humiliation, because I'd wanted this. I'd wanted to belong so badly that I'd walked straight into their trap with a smile. In the kitchen, Megan gave a little laugh, soft but mean. "Guess the Air Force turned her into the perfect cosigner." Mom didn't laugh. "Don't be smug, we need this. If she refuses, we're done. So mind your tone." Done with what? The house. The debt they never told me about. I leaned my head back against the wall, eyes closed. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like the hallway was moving under me. 15 years since that train station. 15 years of trying to be good enough. And here I was, still just a tool. I stepped back quietly, forcing my breathing to slow. The last thing I wanted was for them to hear me. I padded to the living room, sat on the couch, and stared at the darkened Christmas tree. The colored bulbs reflected in my glass like little pieces of mockery. I thought of my unit back at the base, the way we watched each other's backs without question, the way family is supposed to feel. And here, in the house that built me, my own mother and sister were plotting to use me like a credit card. I wrapped the blanket tighter around me and swallowed hard. This time, I wouldn't cry. This time, I wouldn't beg. I would smile through Christmas dinner like nothing was wrong. I would let them think they'd won. And then, quietly, on my own terms, I would walk out the door. Because the girl they sent away at 16 might have come back under their roof. But the woman she became, she wasn't theirs to use anymore. I stared at the ceiling until my heartbeat slowed and the whisper of their voices faded into the hum of the fridge. They had no idea I'd heard them. But soon they would. When dawn came, I was already dressed. I folded the blanket with military precision, smoothed the couch cushions, and arranged the living room exactly as I'd found it. You'd never know the room had housed a betrayal just hours earlier. Upstairs, I could hear Megan's alarm chime through the walls, followed by the soft thud of her feet as she padded toward the bathroom. Caleb's sleepy whine echoed behind her, and then Mom's familiar morning cough. Just another day in the family home. I moved quietly, no trace of drama, no storm of emotion. Just methodical detachment, something the Air Force had trained into me, but that now came as natural as breathing. I walked out to my car and popped the trunk, repacking my duffel, folding my coat with care. The gifts I had so thoughtfully selected, still in the house. I left them on the fireplace hearth, untouched, still wrapped. Let them unwrap their manipulation without me. Inside, I poured myself a final cup of coffee, leaning on the kitchen counter as the sun slipped over the rooftops. The same counter where they'd plotted. I almost smiled. Then, as Megan walked into the kitchen still in her robe, phone in hand, I looked up and said it casually. "I'll be heading back early, just got a call from base." She blinked, half asleep. "Wait, what? You're leaving?" "Yeah, last-minute assignment. They need me back tomorrow morning, just easier to go now." "Oh, wow, okay. I thought you were staying through Christmas." I offered a shrug. "Can't always plan life around the holidays." She gave me a half-hearted smile, like she wasn't quite sure whether to believe me. "Well, the kids will be bummed." "Would they?" "Tell them Aunt Jess had to fly out early, but she left surprises." I pulled on my coat, adjusting the collar. My hands didn't shake this time. As I zipped up my bag, Mom came downstairs with a towel on her head, eyebrows raised. "You're going?" "Base called," I said, breezy and detached. "Operational stuff." She frowned the way someone does when their plan starts to slip out of reach. "But I mean you're sure." "Orders are orders," I said with a smile that didn't quite touch my eyes. "You know how it is." Her mouth opened, then closed. I could see the wheels turning. Whatever she'd been planning to say about the paperwork, the pitch, the favor, she knew the window had closed. She missed the moment, and she didn't know that I had heard everything. "Will you be back after New Year?" she asked, too casually. I paused at the door. "I don't know, we'll see." And then I walked out. The air outside was sharp, clean. It tasted like freedom. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't wait for anyone to chase me down the driveway to protest, to beg, to explain. Because they wouldn't. They'd wait for Christmas dinner, wine glasses in hand, and bring up the paperwork. They'd look for the moment to strike, when the roast was warm and their smiles were rehearsed. But I wouldn't be there. I drove back to Fort Bragg in silence, the hum of the engine lulling me into a strange peace. And when I texted my unit commander, "Is the guest wing still available?" her reply came back in seconds. "You're always welcome home." That simple sentence warmed me more than anything I'd felt since I stepped off the plane to Charlotte. By the time I arrived back on base, twilight was settling in. The barracks were strung with lights, simple, bright, joyful in their modesty. My fellow soldiers greeted me with bear hugs and teasing jokes, their laughter echoing through the mess hall like real belonging. And for the first time in days, I exhaled. Not because everything was fine, but because I was finally where I was seen. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the mess hall was the smell. Not regulation food smell, no hint of powdered eggs or lukewarm lasagna. This was cinnamon and clove, sugar cookies baking, spiced cider simmering in a crock pot someone must have smuggled in under the radar. The second thing I noticed, the laughter. Real, open laughter. It wrapped around me like a wool blanket, soft, steady, safe. Jessica's back! Someone called from the far end of the room, and a cheer went up. Sergeant Lynn rushed over, arms outstretched, practically tackling me in a hug. We thought you were gonna get stuck in suburbia all week. I almost did, I said, smiling. Barely made it out alive. Did the fruitcake claim another victim? Captain Rivera joked, holding up a half-eaten cookie. Worse, I said. Emotional sabotage, but at least I escaped with dignity. The jokes came easy after that. They always did here. These people knew me. Not the version I had to perform for my family, but the real me. The one who didn't flinch when someone barked orders, who knew how to lead under pressure, and who'd earned every stripe on her sleeve with grit and late-night strategy sessions. And more than that, they liked me. Not because of what I could do for them. Not because I was useful, but because I was me. Later that evening, we gathered in the common room for the base's annual holiday charity drive. There was a makeshift tree, half the lights blinking out of sync, and a pile of gifts donated for local families. I added mine to the stack, carefully wrapped presents that were never going to make it under my niece and nephew's tree. They would go to kids who might not get anything else. And that felt right. Sergeant Lynn passed me a mug of cider and nudged me toward the window. Snow had started to fall, light, powdery, catching in the mess hall's floodlights. You okay? She asked, her voice softer now. I nodded. I am now. She gave me a look. They did something, didn't they? I hesitated, then let out a breath. They tried to trick me into co-signing a mortgage, said it was for the family. They were going to spring it on me at Christmas dinner. Lynn winced. Oof, classic guilt-wrapped in tinsel move. They don't even see it, that's the worst part. To them, I'm not a person, I'm an opportunity. Lynn didn't argue, didn't offer a platitude. She just reached into her pocket and handed me a folded paper crane. We made these for the unit's first deployment, one for each of us. Keep it, for when you forget what kind of family you do have. I took it, fingers closing around the soft paper edges. Thank you. That night, back in the guest wing, I sat on the cot under a fleece blanket someone had left with a sticky note. Captain Jess, warm wishes, literally. I smiled, then picked up my phone. There was a message drafted, one I hadn't had the nerve to send yet. It was addressed to my father, the man who had turned his back at the train station, the man who'd watched me leave without a word, the man who, even now, hadn't reached out once. I stared at the blinking cursor. The message read, I'm not coming home for Christmas, I'm already home. But I didn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, I saved it. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't walking away. It's accepting that you were never really seen to begin with, and deciding to stop waiting for it. I set the phone down and turned out the light. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the base in quiet, honest stillness. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. Christmas Eve morning arrived with a hush. No drills, no announcements, just the soft rustle of snow against the window and the quiet hum of the heater in the guest wing. I wrapped myself in the fleece blanket from last night, the one with the note that still sat tucked between the folds, and padded barefoot into the hallway. The base was unusually still. Most folks were off shift, gathered in the common room or sleeping in after an evening of laughter and cider. My phone buzzed once. Then again, I hesitated. Something in my chest tightened the way it always did when I saw her name light up my screen. Mom. The message was short, just 6 words. Where are you? Dinner in an hour. No emojis. No, we miss you. No, hope you're okay. Just logistics, like I was running late for a dentist appointment. I stared at it for a long time, then looked out the window. Outside, my unit was gathering around the base tree, mismatched ornaments, lopsided tinsel, and laughter thick in the cold air. Sergeant Lynn wore a Santa hat 2 sizes too big. Rivera was hauling a tray of cinnamon rolls across the icy sidewalk like he was carrying state secrets. They were bundled up in layers, but underneath I knew every one of them was the same as me. Tough, tired, trying. And yet so full of something I hadn't felt in Charlotte even for a moment. Joy. I turned the camera on, raised my phone, and snapped a photo. Not a posed one, just the real moment. Rivera mid-laugh, Lynn tossing fake snow into the air, someone in the background hoisting a child onto their shoulders. Real joy, real family. Then I opened Mom's message and typed 2 simple sentences. I'm home with my family. I attached the photo, pressed send. The message was marked read within seconds, but no reply came. I sat down in the common room beside Lynn and handed her a coffee. "You okay?" she asked, eyes gentle. "I just told my mother I'm not coming to dinner." Lynn whistled. "Big move." "It was time," I said, staring into my cup. I think I kept showing up hoping they'd become people they never were. That this year would be different. That maybe I'd finally be enough. Lynn nodded. "You were enough, you just weren't convenient." That landed so hard it took my breath for a second. Convenient. That's what it always was. My obedience, my credit score, my silence, they were only welcome when they served a purpose. The moment I became something they couldn't use, the warmth vanished. But here, on base with these misfits and warriors and joke-cracking cinnamon roll smugglers, I wasn't convenient. I was wanted. After breakfast, we gathered around the fireplace in the lounge for our own gift exchange, a white elephant tradition where half the fun came from the ridiculousness of the prizes. Someone got a half-used roll of duct tape. Another unwrapped an expired MRE-labeled lasagna, with a question mark scribbled in Sharpie. I opened my gift and found a tiny hand-carved wooden plane. On the wing was my name. Jess! I laughed, then blinked hard as warmth bloomed behind my ribs. Later that night, I found myself sitting alone in the hallway, the paper Crane Lynn had given me in my lap. I unfolded it slowly, carefully. Inside was a scribbled note. "Family is where someone protects your heart, not where they pretend to own it." I sat there for a long time, letting those words soak in. And this time I didn't feel like I'd run away. I felt like I'd come home. Christmas morning. The base was quiet again, soft with snow and humming with distant laughter. I'd just finished organizing the toy donations when a junior cadet popped his head into the common room. "Captain Walsh, there's someone at the gate asking for you." I blinked. "The gate? Who is it?" He shrugged. "Didn't say. Civilian, older guy. Kind of freaked the guard out, said it's urgent." My stomach dropped. Only one man would show up unannounced on Christmas with that kind of urgency. My father. I walked briskly across the barracks lawn, boots crunching through snow, heart pounding like it hadn't since my first solo flight. The front gate was visible from a distance, frosted metal, wide open, flanked by two guards in thick jackets. And there he stood, Robert Walsh. Same navy wool coat he wore when I was 10. Same careful posture, hands clasped behind his back like he wasn't sure what to do with them. But his face, it had aged in a way I hadn't noticed until now. He looked tired. Not physically, soul-tired. "Jessica," he said as I approached. His voice cracked just enough to confirm what I suspected. This wasn't a casual drop-in. I stopped a few feet away, not crossing the invisible line between soldier and civilian. Not yet. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated, his breath visible in the cold. "I went home last night," he began slowly, "and you weren't there. Your mother didn't say anything until dinner was practically on the table. Just said you de-left early." I said nothing, let him fill the silence. "I thought maybe it was work, but then I saw the gifts you left. The kids' names, yours still wrapped in the corner." His eyes flicked toward me. "And then I found the paperwork." My body went still. "What paperwork?" I asked, though I already knew. "The mortgage forms," he said, voice tightening. "Blank, unsigned, stuffed in a drawer like they'd hoped you'd sign without reading." He paused. "They told me you agreed to help, said it was all arranged. But I know you, Jessica. I know when something smells wrong." That surprised me, the idea that he knew me, that he had ever looked long enough to recognize what I was thinking. "I confronted them," he went on, eyes not meeting mine. "At breakfast, said I wanted the truth, and it all came out." I folded my arms, the cold biting through my gloves. "And now you're here because—" He looked up at me then, really looked. His eyes were glassy, not from tears exactly, but from something deeper. Regret, shame. "Because I should have said something a long time ago." A lump rose in my throat. I fought it down. "I should have stood up for you when you were 16, he said. "I should have fought harder, I should have." He trailed off, shaking his head. "But I didn't. I let your mother send you away because it was easier than arguing, and I've regretted that every single day." I stared at him, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to collapse into his coat and ask why it took this long. But I didn't do either. He took a shaky breath. "I know I can't undo what I did or what I didn't do, but I needed to come here and tell you that you were right to leave, that I'm proud of you, not because of your rank or your medals, but because you did something I never had the courage to do. You walked away when love started looking like control. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with years. Why now? I asked softly. Why not before? He looked down, his voice barely audible. Because I believed them when they said you didn't need me. I blinked. I thought you were fine, he added. Strong, self-sufficient, and I told myself that meant I could step back, but strength doesn't mean someone doesn't need support, does it? I shook my head slowly. No, it doesn't. We stood like that for a long time, snow piling on his shoulders, melting on mine. Can I come in? He asked finally. I hesitated. Not out of anger, but protection. Then I turned to the gate guard. Escort him to the guest wing. He'll be staying as a visitor. The guard nodded, stepping forward. My father looked at me like I'd just handed him the last gift under the tree. Thank you, he said. I nodded once. Let's start with coffee. The base's outdoor canteen wasn't much to look at, just a few metal tables under a canvas awning, heat lamps humming in the corners. But it was quiet, neutral ground. And I needed neutral. I handed my father a steaming paper cup of coffee and sat across from him, still in my base fatigues. He hadn't said a word since we left the guest wing, just nodded politely at the soldiers we passed, his posture too straight, like he was still trying to be someone respectable. He took a sip and winced. Still tastes like jet fuel. I smiled faintly. It grows on you. The silence stretched, long and thin. He looked out at the frost-covered grass, then back at me. Look like her, you know, he said. I tensed. Your mother, he clarified. Same eyes when you're angry, same way of biting your lip when you're holding back. I didn't respond. He sighed, setting his cup down carefully. That's not always a compliment, I know. I folded my arms, more for warmth than defense. You said you came here because you wanted to tell the truth. He nodded. I do. He leaned forward slightly. I let her take too much control, that's the truth. I watched him closely. She's always had a way of deciding what's best, for everyone, and I let it happen because it was easier than confronting her. I told myself it kept the peace, but really it just made me a coward. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't even say goodbye when I left for military school. His face tightened like I jabbed him in the chest. I know, he said quietly. I should have. You didn't visit, not once. I know, and every letter I sent, you never wrote back. His voice cracked. She told me not to, said it would confuse you, that we needed to let the school do its job. I told myself she was right, that we were doing what was best. He shook his head, angry at himself. But I read every letter, Jessica, every single one. I kept them in a drawer, still have them. I sat back, stunned. Why didn't you say that before? Because I thought it was too late, that UD moved on, that bringing it up would only open old wounds. I laughed bitterly. They never closed. He looked down at his hands, the skin weathered, a gold wedding band still glinting on his finger. I didn't know how to be a father to a daughter like you, he said finally. You were smart, bold, defiant when it mattered. You didn't need protecting, you needed support. And I didn't know how to offer that. I let fear make me small. His voice lowered. You were the only one who never asked for anything. That landed like a blow to the chest. I took that to mean you didn't need anything, he continued. But really, I think you were just done asking. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The heat lamps buzzed softly. A breeze drifted through, lifting the corners of the napkins on the table. I'm sorry, he said at last. Not just for what happened this week, for everything. For letting your mother push you away, for not stepping in, for being silent when you needed me to speak. I looked at him, really looked. This man, who had watched me board that train at 16 and never looked back, was now sitting across from me with tear-filled eyes and hands that trembled just slightly over a paper coffee cup. I'm not the girl who needed you to fight for her anymore, I said quietly. He nodded. I know, but I'm still the woman who wanted to know why you didn't. His voice was barely a whisper. Because I was weak, and you were strong, and I let myself believe that was enough. I felt my throat tighten. I don't know if we can fix all of it, I said honestly. I don't expect to, he said, but I'd like to start somewhere. I nodded slowly. Then stay for the veterans' brunch tomorrow, meet some of the people who have been there for me when no one else was. His expression softened. I'd be honored. I stood, my boots crunching against the gravel. And after that, we'll see. He stood too. That's all I ask. As we walked back to the guest wing, side by side, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit until now. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about pretending it hadn't hurt. Maybe it was about giving the past less power than the future. When he told me he was going back to Charlotte that evening, I didn't try to stop him. I just nodded, gave him a tight hug, and pressed one request into his shoulder. Don't let them rewrite the truth this time. His arms tightened around me, and then he was gone. That night, as snow settled quietly over the base, my father walked into the lion's den. My mother had prepared her big Christmas dinner. Turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, her usual arsenal of tradition, staged perfectly for extended family. Cousins filled the living room, uncles hovered near the fireplace, aunts balanced wine glasses on coasters. Laughter floated through the air, loud and comfortable, until he spoke. I wasn't there, but later I heard the story in full, the way my father recounted it to me, his voice still raw. He stood at the head of the table, holding the folded mortgage papers like they were evidence in a courtroom. His hands shook, but his voice didn't. "Jessica's not your tool," he said, his voice cutting across the chatter. "She's your daughter, and she deserves more than this manipulation." Every fork stilled. Every laugh died. My mother blinked, wine glass half raised. "Robert, what are you? You plan to ambush her." He unfolded the papers with deliberate care, letting the silence stretch. "To use her credit to bail you out. You never asked, you just assumed she'd fall in line." Megan shifted uncomfortably, then forced a laugh. "Dad, it's not like that. We just thought." "Thought what?" he snapped, turning to her. "That because she's disciplined, because she has rank, because she's too polite to fight back, you could corner her. Make her sign away her peace of mind for your convenience." Cousins exchanged wide-eyed looks. An uncle cleared his throat. "Robert," my mother said icily, setting down her glass, "this is not the place." "No," he said firmly, voice rising. "This is exactly the place. For too long I stayed quiet. I let you push her away when she was a child. I let you send her off without a word of protest. And I told myself she was strong enough to handle it. But strength doesn't mean she deserved neglect. It doesn't mean she deserved betrayal." The room buzzed with shock. Aunts whispered. Someone dropped a spoon into mashed potatoes with a soft plop. "She left those gifts for your kids by the fireplace," he said to Megan, his voice breaking now. "And you didn't even thank her. You didn't even look her in the eye. Do you understand how small that makes you, how cruel?" Megan flushed red, her jaw tight. "You don't understand. She left us years ago." "No." His fist came down hard on the table, rattling silverware. "We left her. When we chose silence over support. When we decided her worth was measured in what she could provide instead of who she was." My mother's face hardened into stone. "If you're trying to shame us." "I'm not trying," he said, voice low but sharp. "I am telling the truth, something this family has avoided for far too long." A tense silence followed, broken only by the sound of a cousin shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Finally, my father held up the blank mortgage forms. "This is over. Jessica isn't your bailout. She's not your scapegoat. She's your blood. And if you can't treat her with love instead of greed, then you don't deserve her in your lives at all." And with that, he ripped the papers clean in half. The shouting began almost immediately, Megan yelling about betrayal, Mom snapping about airing dirty laundry. But the cousins, the uncles, they sat in stunned silence, watching the dinner implode like a house built on rot. When my father finally walked out, the turkey sat untouched. And the family dinner was over. It was the day after Christmas, and the base was quiet again. Most of the decorations were still up, but the energy had changed. The cinnamon sugar haze had cleared. The paper snowflakes were beginning to curl at the edges. People were resting, unwinding, cleaning up in quiet pairs. I was just finishing up in the supply office when I got the call. "Captain Walsh," came the voice on the radio. "You have a civilian visitor at the front gate. Says it's personal." I froze. Only one person would show up again so soon. I walked fast across the gravel paths, the snow crunching underfoot, my mind spinning through possibilities. Was he here to say goodbye? Had something happened? Did he regret the speech? But when I reached the gate, I stopped in my tracks. There he was, my father, in full dress uniform, navy blue, perfectly pressed, silver buttons glinting in the low winter sun. Medals aligned across his chest like tiny, silent admissions of the man he had once tried to be. He looked older in it, but also solid. like he had found something inside himself that had been missing for years. He stepped forward, holding a thin white envelope in his gloved hand. No speech this time, just the wind and his boots on frozen pavement. "This is for you," he said, offering the envelope. I took it without a word. My fingers tingled from the cold and the adrenaline. I tore it open carefully, expecting another apology, maybe a holiday card, but it was more than that. It was a formal nomination form. My name typed neatly across the top, Captain Jessica Walsh. And below it, in my father's handwriting, I am nominating my daughter for the Mecklenburg County Veterans Honor Award for her distinguished service, personal courage, and unshakable integrity. My breath hitched. He cleared his throat. "They usually ask for a letter. I gave them 6 pages. I swallowed hard. "You didn't have to." "I did," he interrupted gently. "I had to say what I never said before, not just to you, but to anyone who will listen." We stood in silence for a beat, the wind tugging at the edge of his coat. "I thought I'd missed my chance to be the kind of father you needed," he said, looking out toward the parade field. "But maybe, just maybe, I can still be the man you deserve to see standing beside you." And then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped back, straightened his shoulders, and saluted. Tears blurred my vision. This man, who hadn't looked me in the eye at the train station at 16, was now saluting me, in front of a base full of soldiers, in full dress uniform. A few cadets nearby paused mid-step. One of them even snapped to attention. And Air Force Captain Jessica Walsh returned the salute with a crispness I hadn't felt in weeks. My spine was straight, my hands steady. But inside, I was finally shaking. Not from rage, not from grief, but from something new, something like pride. Not just in him, in me. January rolled in quietly. No parades, no confetti, just the wind slicing through the base like it always did, and cadets returning from leave with new stories and old jokes. I was back to early mornings and long drills, back to structure and sweat and that deep, strange peace that comes from knowing exactly where you belong. I hadn't heard from my mother or Megan since Christmas. Not even a forwarded meme or a passive-aggressive emoji. Just silence. It was a kind of relief I hadn't expected. I was no longer trying to decode their moods or anticipate their next ask. I had nothing left to prove to them. And for the first time in my life, that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like freedom. Then the letter came. It was delivered in an official Veterans Affairs envelope, but inside, folded neatly like something sacred, was a second, handwritten note. My father's handwriting. The slant of it made my throat tighten before I even read the first word. "Jessica, I thought a lot about what I'd say when I finally wrote this. I kept trying to start with 'I'm sorry.' But those words don't even begin to scrape the surface. You've built a life full of courage and clarity, and I stood on the sidelines, mistaking your independence for invincibility. That's on me. You never asked for much. Not attention, not money, not praise. But you deserved all of it. And more. I watched from afar as you became the kind of person this world needs more of. Someone who leads without ego, protects without question, and carries her pain like armor she forged herself. I see that now. I see you. Enclosed is my formal nomination for the Mecklenburg County Veterans Honor Award. I don't know if they'll select you, but I do know you've already earned it 10 times over. I'm proud of you, Jess. Not for the medals or the missions, but because you didn't let the wounds we gave you become walls. You turned them into windows. Windows that others now look through to see what's possible. With all my love, Dad. I folded the letter and set it gently on my bunk, hands trembling more than I cared to admit. I wasn't crying. Not exactly. But there was a warmth in my chest that wouldn't go away, a fullness I hadn't felt in years. Like some ancient crack inside me had finally sealed. Not because things had been made perfect, but because the silence had finally been broken. And now I could breathe in a whole new way. That night I stood before my squad of fresh cadets, watching them fidget and yawn through orientation. They were kids, really, bright-eyed, awkward, full of fire and doubt. I looked at them and saw pieces of myself. Pieces of every girl who'd been underestimated, overlooked, or told she was too much and not enough in the same breath. And I made a choice, not to become their parent, but to become the kind of guide I never had. Because building the family you needed, that was its own kind of justice. And I was ready. 1 year later, It was the kind of winter day that couldn't decide if it wanted to snow or shine. Sunlight broke through heavy clouds, scattering gold across the pavement as I walked up the steps of Green Hollow Middle School with a clipboard in hand and butterflies in my stomach. I'd spoken to soldiers, recruits, even elected officials, but nothing made me more nervous than speaking to seventh graders. Maybe it was because I still remembered being one. The librarian, a sweet woman with sharp eyes, met me at the door. "Captain Walsh, we're so excited you're here. They've been buzzing about this all week." I smiled. "I'll do my best to live up to the hype." The multi-purpose room smelled like pencil shavings and hand sanitizer. A row of folding chairs sat awkwardly in front of a projector screen that read in big blue letters, "Resilience and Service, a talk with Captain Jessica Walsh." I glanced down at my notes but didn't read them. I knew what I needed to say, not from memory but from muscle. This story lived in me now, stitched into my bones. As the room filled with students, boys fidgeting with shoelaces, girls whispering behind sleeves, I caught sight of her. Front row, straight spine, braids pulled back in two neat rows. A little girl with brown eyes that didn't blink as she looked at me, like she already knew something. When it was time to begin, I stepped up to the podium. "Hi," I said. "I'm Jessica Walsh. I'm an Air Force captain, a veteran, and I've been in places most people only see on the news. But none of that compares to where I came from." A pause. "When I was 16, I got sent away from home. Not for anything I did wrong, just because my parents didn't know what to do with a daughter who didn't shrink herself." The room was silent. I spent a lot of years thinking I had to earn love, that I needed medals or rank or perfect behavior to finally be enough. But what I learned is this: sometimes the love you deserve doesn't come from the people who share your blood. A few heads tilted, confused, but the girl in the front row nodded like she'd already lived it. I told them about the base, the way strangers had become my family, how I'd found strength not by pretending to be fine, but by admitting when I was. I used to think resilience meant being tough all the time. Now I think it means knowing when to walk away from the people who make you feel small and toward the ones who see how big you really are. When the applause came, it felt warm, but not the kind that feeds ego, the kind that wraps around you like recognition. Afterward, the little girl from the front row came up to me, clutching a drawing she'd made, a stick figure in uniform saluting with a bright gold star in the corner. She looked up at me and asked, "Did your family support you?" My breath caught. I crouched down so we were eye level. "They taught me how to support myself," I said, smiling, "and sometimes that's even better." She nodded solemnly as if she already understood, and just like that I knew it hadn't all been for nothing. The pain, the rejection, the silence, it had created something. Someone, me, and now someone like her might carry it forward. Not the wound, but the strength. If you've made it to the end of Jessica's story, thank you. This journey wasn't just about betrayal or family secrets. It was about finding clarity in cruelty, purpose in pain, and power in choosing your own peace. If you've ever had to rebuild from nothing, if you've ever walked away from the people who should have loved you most, if you're still trying to figure out what your version of home looks like, drop a house with garden in the comments. Because you're not alone. And like Jessica, you're stronger than they ever imagined.